Though I've never had an interest in actual racing, I've always loved racing media, particularly the ones that take things to an over-the-top extreme. From animations both old and new like Wacky Races and Appare-Ranman, to gaming classics like Mario Kart and Crash Team Racing, to even the more obscure and sometimes infamous oddities like Hot Wheels Battle Force 5, and yes, the Speed Racer movie, because it being kinda good is a hill I will gladly die on. There's something about the high-octane action and impossible stunts that hits the right spot for me, and I just can't get enough of the ridiculous designs and larger-than-life personalities that come with them. And I can trace my interest for this oddly specific subgenre back to a little show from the mid-2000s called Oban Star Racers. It's a show that for the longest time I could only remember as a fever dream of zany aliens, impossible technologies and worlds, and an emotionally, if paradoxically, grounded story. And the strangest thing of all is how, after returning to it all these years later, I think it still holds up pretty damn well. So, I want to talk about all the weird details of this intergalactic narrative and why, for me, they make it worth coming back to. And there's probably no better way to start than by looking at how it came together in the first place. For anyone who may not know, Oban Star Racers is an animated series released in 2006, produced by HAL Filmmaker and Pumpkin 3D, and directed by Savinay Meneifel and Thomas Romain. Set in the year 2082, it follows Ava Wei, a young girl who uses her engineering prowess to break out of her abusive boarding school and reunite with her estranged father, Don Wei. However, when he doesn't recognize her, she instead slips into his company as Molly, and subsequently, alongside a hotshot pilot named Rick, an eager gunner called Jordan, and a duo of expert mechanics called Stan and Koji, gets caught up in a secret mission to participate in the Great Race of Oban, an intergalactic tournament hosted by the all-powerful Avatar, a mythical figure of immense power, for the chance to win the ultimate prize. And more specifically, to stop the Krog Empire, an invading alien force with its sights set on Earth, from getting their hands on it. It's considered a bit of a hidden gem of an animated series, and its production took a lot of interesting twists and turns to become a reality. Starting with the fact that, despite what it being considered an anime may imply, it didn't get its start in Japan, but instead began in France with the aforementioned Savinay Meneifel, who, fun fact, happens to be the descendant of the guy who designed the Eiffel Tower? Small world. Anyway, Meneifel originally had the idea for the show back in 1997, when, after years of working as a writer for various animated productions, he felt like many of the projects he worked on lacked the same emotional depth as the shows he grew up on. Things like Future Boy Conan, Candy Candy, Captain Harlock, and Lupin III, and wanted to make something that could reach those same levels of complexity. So, with the help of a small crew of friends and like-minded artists, he started his own company, Save the World Productions, and in 2001 released an animated short that acted as a proof of concept for the series, called Wacky Star Racers. It quickly became an early internet hit, garnering thousands of downloads and filling up forums with fans enamored by its expressive animation and vibrant designs.
J'ai vraiment accroché tout de suite au pilote, très frais, chatoyant, punchy. Et on a commencé à faire une rubrique spéciale donc sur internet dédiée à Wacky Star Racers. C'est devenu très vite un fan site spécial dédié.
Though it wasn't until 2003 that they were able to strike a financing deal with Bandai Visual, Super RTL, France 3, and Jetix Europe to fund the show. The crew moved to Japan for 2 years to work on and oversee the animation, making it a series that came together through an international effort. However, that also made many unsure about whether or not it would work out. Behind the scenes, despite feeling more creatively fulfilled than ever, the French staff struggled to adjust to the long hours and intense workloads that came with working in the anime industry, and many of the Japanese staff were concerned about whether or not they would be able to fully express themselves under the direction of their French co-workers.
モリっていうのはフランスの方が決めたものを忠実に作るっていう仕事ではなくて、日本でディスカッションしながらどういうアニメにしようかっていうところから取り組む作品なんですよっていうご説明をして、それで参加していただければと探しました。
These concerns extended into the wider anime community, as many were skeptical of the nature of its production. To quote an article from New Type USA in 2006, Anyone who watches cartoons of any kind knows that sometimes these cross-cultural productions just don't work. Maybe they get the anime look right, but forget about the nuances, thus killing the show's appeal. I don't think any of us watch anime just because the characters have big eyes or look a certain way. We watch it because anime offers something different and unique in storytelling. American cartoons are cartoony. With anime, you could be watching a kids show, but there's usually stronger or more powerful themes hidden inside it. For those who worked on the show, it was a new experience that was difficult to adjust to, and for fans, it was an approach that had a reputation for going awry, and many were uncertain about how it would turn out. Though, considering the praise it ended up receiving, I think it's safe to say it managed to do pretty well for itself. It was a production that sought to literally and figuratively bring together the best of both worlds of animation, and it's something I think can also be seen in its mix of traditional animation and CGI. I feel like at this point it's part of my brand to talk about CGI in your anime. Experts warn that it's, quote, more likely than you think. But Oban's use of CG alongside the whole no-nose thing is arguably one of the defining aspects of its aesthetic. It's something that seemed to have always been a mind for the series, shown by the fact that its original short was entirely CG, but for the show itself it was scaled back quite a bit, being used mainly for ships and backgrounds. While the 2D was handled in Japan by HAL Filmmaker and now defunct anime studio known for their work on Princess Tutu and the Aria series, the CG was done back in France by Pumpkin 3D. The staff focused their efforts on making the CG blend into the show by leaning into stylized cel-shaded lighting and rendering, while still doing their best to take advantage of the unique details of those CG elements, like the dynamic camera and the reusability of the assets built for it. And I just can't help but be astounded by how well it all works. It clicks with the style of the rest of the show so seamlessly that, while still obviously CG, it's hard to imagine the series without it, and the animation of the CG itself easily conveys the racer's speed, weight, and momentum, while pouring so much personality into them through the simplest of movements, whether it be to make them goofy and fun or unnervingly ominous. It's especially impressive considering that it came at a time when CG was only really starting to make its way onto TV, and more importantly as CG animation was just starting to find more stylized artistic directions to follow. Though it's also kind of fun to notice the occasional error when scrubbing through the footage, like the sun just disappearing on the last frame of a shot. The show was able to integrate CGI into its aesthetic at a time when that technology was far less robust so well that it still holds up nearly a decade and a half later. It seems like a production that was more than happy to try new things and experiment with what it could do, and is something I think is clear in the sheer variety of designs and features for everything. It runs across a whole spectrum of environments over its runtime, from Alwas's wide open fields and deltas and cramped markets and taverns, to the many different biomes scattered across Oban, with its forests of striking crimson and luscious greens, acid river valleys and snowy mountaintops, and even the sprawling ruins of a once great and powerful civilization. The racers themselves are just as varied, with the show featuring everything ranging from pirate ships, cement mixers, and steampunk space tanks, to more organic speeders, like a giant beetle, a tentacled space whale, and whatever the fuck this is. There are ships that split off into two different machines, ships fueled by an alien equivalent of hamster wheels, and even a straight up transformer. They all have their own unique way of fighting too, from using laser blasters, magical bows and arrows, or turning their entire ship into a supercharged spear. And hell, some don't even need proper weapons to get the job done. Even the tracks themselves are played with, as it often adds unique rules to each one that keeps the racers on their toes. From turning the entire thing into a fighting arena or a collectathon, or even hiding the finish line in unexpected places.
We're back in the race!
And there's just as many character designs to match, as the series presents a whole plethora of aliens and otherworldly creatures to get to know and love, from the pilots themselves to the sentient lifeforms that linger in the background and in crowds. And I gotta say, looking back, it's kinda crazy to realize how much these designs ended up influencing a lot of my artistic interests later in life, and even some non-artistic interests. It just kinda explains a lot. And as a quick side note, I find it interesting to see how it subverts the expectations of its more otherworldly characters. Spirit is initially depicted as something out of a horror movie, with a body that just looks unnatural and whose very presence sends Molly spiraling into a panic. That discomfort is only heightened by the knowledge that he was responsible for the death of Molly's mother, rounding out that image of Spirit as a malevolent force. However, when he and Molly do race, it quickly becomes clear that Spirit doesn't want to harm her, and instead uses telepathic magic to show Molly what happened to her mother, revealing that her engine had sprung a leak and that he was trying to help. Despite his uncanny appearance, he's shown to be a deeply caring character. Similarly, Murr is a literal crab monster that's introduced as a wild animal that chases down Molly and Jordan, before they realize he's actually one of the racers in the finals.
Thanks, Prince, but I clued into that one a while ago.
Later, after being forced into an acid river by Cross, a high-ranking general of the Krog Empire, Murr becomes enraged and ends up taking his anger out on Molly. However, he calms down after his telepathic tentacles show him Molly's grief. And what's more, he carries her onto his ship to show her his reason for racing, a chance to revive his dead mate who was killed by poachers. It's a tragic backstory and one that comes up again when the truth about the great race of Oban is revealed.
Can the Avatar bring someone back to life?
The Avatar enjoys many powers. However, no one, not even the Avatar, should ever dare to tamper with the kingdom of the dead. Sorry.
That's what I was afraid of.
The show leans into the idea that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, as it more often than not makes its most intimidating and sometimes monstrous characters the most empathetic and ironically human of the cast. The diversity of designs the show features not only shows the creativity of the staff behind it, but also adds to its world, creating a sense that there's so much to this galaxy to see and explore beyond our own planet that we're only just getting a taste of across these 26 episodes. In many ways, Oban Star Racers production, through its many risky creative decisions, was able to create something wholly distinct from its contemporaries at the time, and that to this day still stands out as a unique technical achievement. And those choices don't just stop with its production. This is probably the section that's gonna end up getting the most reactions, but I think it's still kind of interesting, so... For as throwaway as it may seem nowadays, Oban Star Racers centering an action-adventure series around a girl was, and in many ways still is, an unusual decision that acted as a core pillar of the show. It was definitely important to its creators. In an interview for New Type USA, Eamon Eiffel talks about why he believes there are so few action-oriented shows prominently featuring women and girls, saying it's because of Western toy makers and broadcasters' fear of alienating boy audiences. In Japan, female leads are more common, but they tend to be sexy females with large oppi targeted at an older audience, and goes on about how he had to fight a lot with all the potential investors to keep Molly a girl. Most of them wouldn't hear it. After the success of our 2001 trailer, I had to turn down at least one very important investor for that very reason. It was a difficult choice and one that made us lose precious months, but I couldn't turn Molly into a boy. Having a female lead was central to the concept. Not to mention that if I gave in on that, I felt like it would just be the beginning of more alterations. The people behind the show wanted to take a chance and make a female role model for audiences to look up to, and it's something that had quite an impact for a lot of people.
Ça fait du bien d'avoir une héroïne qui est pas nunuche.
Exactement.
Et qui est mouvante mais qui est forte en même temps, quoi. Elle est pas juste toute faible ou juste très forte, elle est bien, ça change.
Of course, what makes it notable isn't just that the show has a female protagonist, but the way in which it portrays her as a character. She's stubborn and has an explosive temper, but also a deep sense of compassion for those around her. So much so, she's willing to drop everything just to make sure her friends are okay. She's honest, if in a painfully blunt way, and carries deep emotional trauma that makes it difficult for her to properly express herself. And over the course of the series, slowly comes out of her shell and learns to trust those around her. She's a well fleshed out character who's easy to relate to and be inspired by as she grows over time. As well, it subverts a lot of tropes typically associated with girl characters. From stuff as surface level as her having an interest in things not considered traditionally feminine, to more subtle stuff like how Jordan and Aika's attempts to prove themselves to her tends to just sort of make them look like idiots when they realize she can more than easily handle it herself.
Get down. Do you want us to be spotted?
And most interestingly, the show lets her be emotional without treating her as lesser for it. In fact, it feels like it goes out of its way to put the audience on her side. For example, the first time she wins a race, she immediately runs into problems when Dawn scolds her for her recklessness, and threatens to pull out of the race entirely because of it despite her victory. While some negativity is understandable, given she went against his orders to race, the extent to which he goes in reaction to it quickly comes across as unreasonable. And the visuals of the scene only amplify this, with many shots putting him high above the other characters, often with a slight angle to emphasize the disparity, reinforcing the idea that he's out of touch because he quite literally isn't grounded, as if sitting in an ivory tower where he can look down on the others, something that itself is emphasized by the way many shots literally show that perspective to reflect how he sees them, and especially Molly. Alongside the context of his abandonment of her for so many years, everything about the scene emphasizes how cold and callous Dawn can be, thus reflecting Molly's perspective of him and the situation. So when she blows a casket, for as angsty as it may seem, it's a reaction that's easy to understand.
I'm so out of here.
The show goes out of its way to treat her with a level of nuance that matches her internal complexity. It gives the same level of thought to the way the world and characters around her interact with her too, and how often problems crop up from it as a result. She's thrown into an environment that's overwhelmingly dominated by characters that either are or are treated as, in the English dub at least, men. And while it's easy to argue that with such a variety of different alien species and cultures, different factors are playing all sorts of different roles in that disparity, for the Earth team, the social expectations that come with one's gender plays a big part in it. Molly's abilities and ideas are frequently shot down by everyone around her, with a lot of remarks and comments thrown her way, treating her as too emotional to take seriously.
Sir, please excuse Molly. It's been a rough morning. She's not quite herself today.
There's a strong double standard in the way she's treated, as while her recklessness is criticized, Rick's recklessness ends up being met with praise.
Hey, great ride, Rick!
Hey, thanks a lot, you guys.
When she asks whether or not Rick is okay afterward, everyone acts like she's just jealous.
Do you think it's normal that Rick would take chances like he did today?
Molly, you wouldn't be jealous of Rick, would you?
And most damningly of all, the head of the Earth team, Dawn, constantly puts her down specifically because she's a girl. First doubting her engineering skills.
Can't you see I'm a girl?
Oh, is that so? Well then, you've got even less of a reason to be here. This is not a shopping mall. You're in the hangar of a star racing team.
Refusing to let her race when Rick is put out of commission.
I appreciate your sense of duty, Molly, but I will never let an outsider, let alone a girl, sacrifice herself for our team.
Avoiding her, giving her any kind of praise, and only doing so begrudgingly after being not so subtly prompted.
Molly, I must congratulate you too. It was a tough race, and you fared beautifully.
And later on, even after she's proven herself, he still tries to dictate whether or not she should race based on how he feels about it.
Molly, wait.
Yes?
I don't want you to race today.
What?
It's too dangerous. We'll just have to sit this one out.
He may have his reasons, but it doesn't change the fact that what he's functionally doing is using his position of power to keep her down. The series explores the ways in which Molly's status as a girl affects the way she navigates this world, as those around her, intentionally or not, weigh her down with the expectations and stereotypes of her gender, and as a result, creates an environment that often treats her like an outsider despite her skills and passion. It's honestly kinda surprising to see how much it leans into the issue, especially given the younger-ish skew of its audience, or at least I assume. But at the same time, there's a part of me that can't help but feel like a lot of it is a bit basic? Granted, I wasn't expecting any groundbreaking revelations about society from a fucking alien racing show from the mid-2000s, and I will give it credit for diving into the unconscious ways in which people can end up reinforcing these problems, but a lot of it feels like it just amounts to, hey, don't be a prick to someone cause of their gender. Which, I mean, everyone already gets that, right? Right? Plus, for as much as it subverts and avoids many questionable female-centric tropes, it feels like it still falls face first into others. For as much agency as Molly is given in the series, her character arc still revolves around a relationship to a man, even if the general context is different than what that trope usually refers to. The romance between her and Jordan, while implied to be reciprocated, is only really shown through Jordan's perspective, and for the sake of comedy, comes across as one-sided due to Molly's sheer obliviousness.
How about you stargaze alone? I'm freezing.
It removes her autonomy within this subplot and makes her into something to be won over like a trophy, with little time to see how she feels about it, which is especially weird considering how well it explores her feelings for Aika.
I think he's kinda cute.
What?
And this one is a real nitpick, but it uses a dead woman as trauma fodder for its characters not once, not twice, but technically thrice. For as thoughtful as its handling of its female characters is, there are still a few places where it feels like it falters. But I don't think that invalidates what it does well. While it may stumble, I still think it manages to get across its better points clearly. Of course, how effectively it does so is going to vary wildly from person to person based on their respective experiences with such issues, but I think there's a lot of nuance to explore with it. And for me, in this case, with this specific through line, I think there's a lot more to appreciate about how Oban Star Racers highlights the unique qualities of its heroine than there is to criticize. However, there is one through line I think the series manages to handle almost perfectly. What defines Oban Star Racers' narrative for me is its focus on loss and how we come to terms with it. In a literal sense, the risk of losing a race is the primary force driving most of the conflicts in the show. It pushes the characters to their limits to win, with some going as far as to sabotage the competition to do so. From Paradise hacking into the Earth team's systems to wreck their ship, to Lord Furcher and his crew literally kidnapping their opponents to reduce the amount of people they have to race against. It makes some do things that go against their morals and values, as Ica, the Prince of Neurasia, is forced into an alliance with the Krogs while they're forced to sit on his home planet, and made to do things that go against his code of honor as a Neurasian warrior, out of fear for what those soldiers might do to his people.
It is my will that you now serve them as you would your king.
It also pushes the Earth government to make a risky move by pulling a surprise attack on the Krogs near the end of the series to try and drive them back, only for it to completely backfire on them.
Earth Defense 3! We've got more over here! 3, no 8! Wait, 11! They're coming from everywhere!
It's even one of the defining features of the Krogs' imperial mentality, as they have so little tolerance for failure that the only acceptable response to it is execution.
What happened to Tauros?
Apparently the good colonel lost his head. Literally. It seems his superiors weren't very pleased with his defeat against the Earth team.
This fear of loss also turns teams against themselves, like when Ica and Molly have to race against each other. They decide to try and race through sheer skill alone, but both run into dead ends as their crew pushes them to go all out to win, with Ica being told by his trainer to use his magic to make up for his Beetle's injury, and Molly being shut down by Dawn as they install new weaponry onto the Whizzing Arrow to account for its current lack of boost. And in the end, it just drives a wedge into their relationship when Molly's attempts to have that fair race with Ica fail.
Why? Why did you have to ruin everything?
You trusted the prince more than me, partner!
You idiot!
And on a more surface level, it really leans into that risk. During the finals for the qualifiers, the Earth team doesn't just lose once, they lose twice in a row, and then a third time just before their final race, and only manage to get into the finals on Oban through a technicality. The Earth crew were constantly on the edge of losing everything throughout the series, and it does a lot to both heighten the intensity of the drama and ground the stakes of the series by showing how easy it'd be for it all to go wrong. But more importantly, the series focuses on loss in a more general sense, of losing someone or something important to you. Most of the racers in the series are driven by or end up going through exactly that. Some, like Dawn and Molly and Myrrh, have lost loved ones. Some have lost their homes or their people, like Rush, whose planet was devastated by the Krogs, or Sirius, the last of his people. And others lose their reputations and even careers, like Flint and Marcel, the Alwas racers who lost to the Earth team, in spite of the fact that the race was rigged in their favor. Or Rick, who, after the accident at the first race, ends up being so overwhelmed by stress and trauma afterward that he's simply unable to race anymore. Hell, at the end of the series, even the planet Oban, as everyone knows it, is lost.
Everything's gone. The temples, the trees, the animals.
Many of the characters go through or are dealing with some kind of heart-wrenching loss. And what I find interesting about this is how the show portrays their respective ways of dealing with this, and how destructive some of those coping mechanisms can be. Many become so overwhelmed by that pain that they simply lash out at anything that reminds them of it, like how Molly attacks Spirit in the race together.
I couldn't care less what happens to me, as long as you disappear once and for all!
Many of the characters look for a way to try and undo that loss, believing they can undo the pain that's come with it and return to the life they had before through the power offered by the ultimate prize. Molly hopes she can revive her mother and become a family with her dad again. Myrrh hopes he can revive his dead mate. Rush hopes he can restore his home planet to its original beauty. Even the big bad of the series, Canaletto, in a similar if wildly different sense, hopes to be able to manipulate the tournament so he can take the power of the Avatar and return to the time when he was able to rule the galaxy with an iron fist. A time when he could obliterate entire worlds on a whim. However, the truth about the ultimate prize puts a damper on most of their hopes.
So then it's true. There is no ultimate prize.
There is a prize, Molly, but perhaps not the prize you had hoped for.
They can't simply return to the life they used to have, and their attempts to do so are either pointless or would cause more harm than good. However, some characters are already well aware of this, and so rather than focus on the past, they try to keep moving forward, like Dawn. but even that's shown to be just as detrimental a path to take. After losing Maya, he fell into a deep depression that made it difficult to even look at his own daughter because of how much she reminded him of her, and so he decided to cut all ties with anything and everything that could bring back memories of what he lost, from his home to his career to even his own daughter.
You must harness me to be a good girl, Eva. Daddy's too busy to take care of you now. Surely you can understand.
He does everything he can to bury his past so he doesn't have to think about it, and eventually manages to pull himself out of his stupor to build a new life for himself, but still refuses to acknowledge his past. He doesn't even let anyone around him know he had a past. It's too painful for him to deal with. Though he may have found a way forward, he's only done so by burying his feelings, and as a result hasn't really let himself process them. He simply let them fester, and they've built up to such a point that the smallest things seem to set him off, both literally through flashbacks and generally with his attitude. And what's more, that approach, for as much as it protects him, only hurts those around him, particularly the daughter he abandoned for so long.
I saw your face so often in the magazines. I just told myself that you were too busy to visit.
Don is so overwhelmed by grief that he's unable to consider the pain he's caused others, and the more time goes on, the more his rationalizations sound like excuses to avoid acknowledging the damage he's done.
Why didn't you contact me then?
I'm sorry. I still couldn't face you.
Though moving forward is important to cope with such loss, doing so by ignoring one's past and what happened not only prevents one from coming to terms with it, but also leads them to lashing out at those around them, intentionally or not, when it starts to become too much. To me, the show sets up a dichotomy between those who want to return to a time before their loss, and those who want to forget that world ever existed, and how the hyper-focus on only one or the other is at best a waste of time and effort, and at worst actively harmful to oneself and those around them. And I don't know, there's just something about it that nowadays just sorta hits different. 2020's been a chaotic year, with the pandemic, the police brutality, and just everything, honestly. I see and hear a lot of people talking about how they can't wait for things to just go back to normal, and for as much as I empathize with the sentiment, I think the truth is that we just can't. We've all lost that world, and all the attempts to try and return to it or act like nothing ever happened will just bury it even deeper, and we're all struggling to come to terms with that. And it's just kinda weird to see a show from the mid-2000s managing to capture that same feeling so well, even if the context is very different. But in the end, the show does emphasize a way forward by acknowledging that pain. Rick, for as devastating as the loss of his career is for him, is able to use his expertise to teach and support Molly, to pass on his knowledge to a new generation of racers, so to speak, but only after letting himself accept that his racing days are over. In that same vein, so too are Molly and Dawn able to reconcile and rebuild their relationship, but are only able to do so after Molly accepts that her mother is truly gone, and that she has so much more to race for, and after Dawn confronts the pain he put his daughter through and finally learns to trust her. They all find a way to move on from their loss, but to do so they not only need to confront it head on, but also need to let themselves grieve the world and life they know they'll never be able to have again, so that they can work toward building a new one. It's a bittersweet message, but one that brings with it a sense of hope, because for as difficult and painful as things may seem, they can eventually get better. There are a lot of things that make Oban Star Racers strange in one way or another, but what's most weird about it isn't necessarily the show itself, despite how much it tries. It's the experience of returning to it after so long and finding that this 2000s fever dream is a hell of a lot better than my rose-tinted glasses gave it credit for. It can often be daunting to return to a show from your childhood out of fear that it's aged poorly. So much so, it might even make you question why you liked it in the first place.
Made for you! Get lost, I'm trying to be sad!
But I feel like I can safely say that this is one of those shows that's managed to hold up pretty well over the years, and whose narrative and aesthetic oddities I think have only made it more endearing with time. It's a weird experience to go through, but for me, that's what makes it so great. And yeah, those are my thoughts. I've been wanting to cover this one for a while and just had no idea how to approach it, until that World of format worked out pretty well for my V-Stars video, and I realized that structure will probably be a perfect way to try. I mean, really this format is just an excuse to ramble about some thoughts I have on a thing with a loose through line of weirdness to tie it all together, so it's not like it was too hard to figure out, but still. And mostly it was just fun to actually rewatch this series. It's been something I've been meaning to do for ages now out of sheer curiosity, but I will say it was also weird realizing shocking how much I misremembered about it. Like, I always thought Rick was just a prick, then it turns out he's like the best character. And I have so many strikingly clear images in my head of specific shots from the show that just turned out to never have been a thing. It's so strange, which in retrospect I guess just kind of makes it the perfect thing to make a Weird World of video about. Anyway, hope yous are staying safe, washing your hands, wearing a goddamn mask, and let me know what you think. If yous agree, disagree, if yous remember watching Oban Star Racers as a kid, who your favorite Star Racer is, etc. And thanks for watching. If yous enjoyed this and want to see more, then check out my last video where I ramble about some of my top things of spring 2020. Or watch me talk about all the weird details of Beastar's production, presentation, and narrative, and why, for me, they make it so great. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and of course, subscribe to come fly with me. Hit the bell, stay notified, follow me on Twitter for more updates, ramblings, and poor attempts of humor, and hopefully, I'll see yous later.